Dawlabani. Saïd, je reprends. Donc, c'était un privilège d'accueillir ce soir au campus de la Spirale Dynamique Saïd Dawlabani. Saïd est ce que l'on appelle en anglais un Spiral Wizard, spécialiste de l'évolution des systèmes de valeurs, économiste, cofondateur du Center for Human Emergence Middle East. Saïd est l'auteur de plusieurs livres dont Dynamique et Second Sapiens, dont il nous parlera ce soir. Saïd a travaillé pendant de nombreuses années auprès de Don Beck, qui lui a transmis le précieux héritage de Clark Graves, mais aussi le fruit de ses propres expérimentations de la spirale à l'échelle macro, notamment en Afrique du Sud. La question qu'il aborde aujourd'hui est le fruit de toute une vie. Elle va droit à l'essentiel dans sa simplicité rugueuse. C'est une question que chacune et chacun présent ici ce soir se pose ou s'est posé. En préserver la possibilité de la vie sur Terre. Cette question en entraîne beaucoup d'autres, parfois inconfortables, que Saïd n'élude pas. Les solutions simples ont déjà été essayées avec les résultats que chacun peut voir. C'est pourquoi Saïd nous invite ce soir à prendre du recul, énormément de recul, jusqu'à la planète Jupiter. Les problèmes existentiels auxquels l'humanité se trouve aujourd'hui confrontée sont si complexes qu'il nous faut changer entièrement de logiciel pour les aborder. Au passage, Saïd invente tout un nouveau vocabulaire pour traduire une pensée nouvelle qu'il nomme la pensée naturelle ou gaïenne. Ne soyez donc pas surpris d'entendre ce soir de nouveaux mots. Il fallait bien cela pour traduire cette pensée radicalement innovante, fruit de longues recherches multidisciplinaires. Face au bouleversement exponentiel de nos conditions d'existence, il est temps de fusionner notre intelligence dans celle de Gaïa, notre chère planète. L'époque où nous pensions contrôler le monde et les événements est révolue. Il est temps de lâcher prise, d'apprendre à faire avec ce qui vient, avec ce qui est déjà là depuis toujours. Le choc émotionnel et cognitif est rude. De cela aussi, Saïd se fait le témoin dans son livre et nous aurons l'occasion d'y revenir dans plusieurs ateliers ici même. Pour les personnes enfin qui souhaiteront poursuivre l'échange avec Saïd, il sera de passage à Paris du 5 au 8 juin. On en reparlera. En attendant, je lui donne la parole. Ses propos seront traduits en français. Vous voyez les sous-titres sous l'écran. Et je traduirai dans l'autre sens tout à l'heure vos questions dans les séances interactives. Thank you for your patience, Saïd, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, everyone, for putting this together. Good evening, everyone. My presentation tonight is a summation of my work with Dr. Beck that has been happening for over 20 years now. So I'd like to maybe start with offering a very executive summary on my experience in working with Dr. Beck and how my own thinking has evolved over the last 2 decades or so in my engagement with spiral dynamics and its application to large-scale change. So back in 2003, Dr. Beck contacted my late wife, Elza Malouf, and myself and asked if we can help him bring the spiral dynamics model to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And about a year later, the three of us formed the Center for Human Emergence Middle East, through which we did our work in the region for a few years. And then at about 2006 or so, I began to write about some of the economic issues we started to see here in the United States. It primarily started with the housing sector, and having had a background in finance and macroeconomics, and having been a home builder, I figured I should write about this through the prism of spiral dynamics. And I found a lot of positive responses to framing economic issues in an evolutionary setting that is spiral dynamics. And then in 2008, with the onset of the global financial crisis, I began to write about the causes of the financial crisis and so forth, and found a huge audience interested in my kind of writing. But really, no one was more excited about that than Dr. Beck himself. And so from that day forward, he basically told me that from now on, all the joint appearances that him and I have together, whether it's level 2 spiral dynamics training or higher, or just joint appearances at conferences as keynote speakers, that most of my work should focus on the evolution of economic and financial systems, and begin to view, to offer that view through the spiral dynamics lens. And all that culminated in my 2013 book, Memenomics, which has been quite successful. It's been translated to several languages. Certain chapters from it and my own contributions have contributed to similar books in about 20 other different languages or so. And then about 10 years ago, Dr. Beck and I started a conversation about whether the spiral dynamics model itself is capable of addressing all the existential problems that were beginning to emerge, all the chaos, all the uncertainty, all the volatility that was emerging, whether or not the spiral dynamics model, the way it was, is capable of addressing these issues. And so that dialogue carried through 2016, and almost every time that Dr. Beck and I talked about these issues, he will end his conversation with telling me, Saeed, you're not zooming out far enough. He told me that I need to be standing on Jupiter to see these problems with clarity. And so, you know, standing on Jupiter really has a lot to do with this first slide that we're going to look at, the first image that you see in front of you. And this is really the holonic structure or the nature of how spiral dynamics works. It works in a concentric way. The largest holon is a representative of the smaller holons at a larger scale. What I added to this is the degree of complexity that's involved in the application of the model. So most people I know, close to 95 to even 97% of people who study spiral dynamics, focus on levels 1 and 2, either personal growth or corporate consulting. If you want to use the framework to address macro issues, we're talking about issues that deal with regions of a country, region of the world, and the world, you have to begin at complexity level 4. And keep in mind that the higher the size of the application, the more complex the conditions are, the more variables you have to take into consideration as you do this work. And of course, the longer things take to accomplish. A great degree of the length of time is measured on whether the person, the organization, the culture, whatever size application you use in the framework for, whether they are in an open state, in a closed state, or in an arrested state. And, you know, those are certain psychological conditions, psychosocial conditions that exist along every holon, okay? So as I expanded my view to see this whole issue from Jupiter, what became apparent to me is that there were 3 factors that are influencing the future of where things stand. And those 3 things were primarily, number 1, the post-World War II order as we know it is beginning to decline. The values of that paradigm are now beginning to decline, okay? And we'll talk about that in a minute. The second issue was the quick rise and adoption of the digital age, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then most of the presentation really here is dedicated to how we discover that new intelligence that's going to help us save the largest holonic structure we'll ever be tasked to save, and that is our planet. Okay, so those are the structures that the scope of my book explores, and really most of my work since Dr. Beck and I started having these conversations back in 2016, and my subsequent work and writings about it. So one thing to keep in mind as we go through these different holonic structures is the life cycle model. Life cycles apply to every value system, to every scale of value system. There's a time when values rise and they become accepted and they become to define a person, a group, or a culture. And there's also a time when these things begin to decline. And so if we look at the model that gave us the post-World War II order, we basically decided to set aside war and begin to deal with each other through peaceful means. And what became apparent is the best way to deal with each other in peaceful means is to do so through commerce. So this is where I coined the term to name that period of time, to name that paradigm, peace through commerce. Okay. So what we've done is we've adopted the idea that through creating global institutions, we can come to a better understanding of ourselves through trade, through commerce, through economic activity that will achieve the byproduct of which will be peace. But what we've done, so in 1945 and in subsequent years after that, we created the United Nations, we created the World Health Organization, we also created the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. All these institutions were created at a time when the world population was just emerging from a post-war era. The population was about a third what it is now. So since then, the world population has tripled in size. The size of the global economic activity today is about 15 times the size it was when these institutions were created. And what's true to spiral dynamics is the fact that the more things grow in complexity, the more adjustments or the more complex your view has to become. Whether that view grows in complexity within the same value system, or you need to reach to higher order systems to achieve it, it needs to be done. If the institutions don't move in concert with the rate of how culture is complexifying, okay, you're apt to have problems. Okay, so this is the general picture that I paint on why we're beginning to see so much decline in the way, for example, when we set out to develop the third world, we created the World Bank and the IMF, who gave loans to these third world countries, hoping that they will overcome their existence that has defined them for thousands of years in level 2 of existence, in the purple stage of development, without really extending what they needed to have in place in order for them to really become part of the modern paradigm on life. So what happened is all the aid that they were given fell into the hands of dictators, fell into the hands of tribal leaders who took full advantage of the money that was given to them and empowered their own tribes. So looking back at the experiment 80 years from now, what you're beginning to see is that these third world countries now are in a perpetual, endless cycle of debt. The best they can do is service the interest on the debt that the Western world has given them. You look at the IMF and it's done the same exact thing. You look at, for example, the United Nations. The United Nations was created from a utopian green perspective, as noble as humanity can be. But what it forgot is that it didn't have the enforcement mechanisms to stop wars. Look at what's happening in Gaza and look what's happening in the Ukraine. The United Nations has absolutely no enforcement powers to stop these wars. If it were to evolve with the complexity of how life has evolved, one of the first things that the United Nations would have had, if it were to become a global power that really answered the new complexity, is it will have enforcement mechanisms on how to end wars. So that's not the case. So this is just a rough general example of what is happening with the post-World War II paradigm that we seem to be taking for granted. Okay. Now the second factor, and we can go to the next slide, please. So the next slide really has to do with how quickly the digital age has taken over our lives, how quickly it was created, and even faster, how quickly it was adopted. Okay. Really, in order for you to understand the depth of the problems that we're seeing around the world, you really need to understand the value systems of the people who created the very first model that allowed navigation on the web to become ubiquitous, and everybody who had an internet connection can use it. So the quote you see on the top of this slide here comes from a group of very well-meaning scientists at the University of California in Berkeley. Now, Berkeley, the town Berkeley, California, was the birthplace of the hippie movement here in the States. It was the birth of the green system, the system that was an anti-establishment, the system that wanted to get the presence of any hierarchy. So those values have spread to Berkeley, to neighboring San Francisco, and also to nearby Silicon Valley. So the idea that these people wanted to disrupt the physical structures that have defined who we are for the last 10,000 years, the way we emerge to higher values, the way we build physical analog institutions in the physical world. The idea that these could be disrupted, digitized, and then moved and democratized. The idea of democratization was great, that everybody will be allowed equal access to things so they can prosper equally, so we can finally achieve a world that's driven by egalitarianism, that everybody is equal, that everybody has the same opportunity, everybody is at the same level of humanitarian give and take. The problem with that is really an issue with the way the green system it sees itself. When you get rid of hierarchy, who takes advantage of those disrupted structures? The opportunist value of the unhealthy green system and the predatory values of the red system. So when you look at why liberal democracies are failing, when you put into place an entire infrastructure of information that is distributed in accordance with the digital age, meaning that everybody has access to how they inform people, the people in the red system, the likes of Donald Trump, the likes of Putin, the likes of every dictator you can think of in the world come from that red system. When we had institutions existing in the physical realms, those people were prevented from entering politics. They were prevented from just entering the hierarchical nature that you had to prove yourself, that you have to be accomplished in certain ways, that you had to have certain intelligence to allow that. The green system got rid of that hierarchy. And so when people ask you why there's so much, why is liberal democracy being replaced by bureaucracy or autocracy? The reason is the nature of the green system. Okay, so in the first decade, we have the motto of anything that you wanted to do through the digital age is, if something was quantifiable, okay, it becomes digitizable. Think of the publishing industry, think of the music industry. Okay, my books 40 years ago would have never seen the light of day. They would have never been published. It is due to the disruption in the publishing industry that I am able to communicate my messages through my writings. The old digital work, silos that existed would have prevented me. I know I would have never been published based on the nature of what I have to say. So that's the first decade of how the internet advanced. Then the next stage began in 2006. Web 2.0 is when the web itself became smart. That is when we created the Google search engine. And along with that came the smartphones. So the smarter the system became, the more we engaged in seeing the beautiful things that the internet offered us, ignoring all the shadow stuff, ignoring the fact that, for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. This is really important to understand the nature of how we think. From the Big Bang Theory, from day one of creation, the universe was divided into pairs of opposite. The male and female, darkness and light, black and white, those kinds of things. What we're doing, we are seeing the bright side, we are completely ignoring the dark side. That is the nature of the human being. More specifically, it is the nature of the orange stage of development, the one that seeks to manipulate the truth, that tries to explain the universe through analysis and scientific discovery, forgetting what it discovers, externalize that to its environment. So this is what happened when we climbed up to Web 2.0. Although things have gotten smarter, the dangerous part of what we ignored even got smarter, contributing more to what we see in stages of decline now, and it's happening at an extremely rapid level that we've not seen before. Now does anybody know what happened in 2023, Web 3.0? That's when, in the fall of 2023, Silicon Valley introduced Chat GPT. Okay, so Chat GPT represents Web 3.0, and a week before it was released, 1,100 scientists in Silicon Valley wrote a memorandum to the government saying you should stop the release of Chat GPT till there is a time where we can understand it better and you can regulate it better. Here's the brightest people who know the negative side of technology telling a government that knows absolutely nothing about the digital age, telling them, please regulate us. There's no one in the entire ecosystem of politics here in the States that knows how Silicon Valley operates, leave alone the idea that, the complexity of how algorithms and artificial intelligence work. There's no one, even, the creators of these things themselves, they have no idea how to regulate themselves. So now the degree to which things are being disrupted, democratized and weaponized has gone exponential. I love AI. It helps me, if I want to explore an idea back from, 40 years ago when I was studying economics in college and I forgot the certain aspects of it, I ask it the question and it gives me the answer. It's great for things like that, but it's not good for things that, I ask certain questions to augment what I need. But when someone like Donald Trump asks a question, or people that follow him ask it a question, it is for the purpose of providing them tools on how to continue with their destructive behavior, how to dismantle government. Okay, so those are like the two sides example of what the digital age has done, and we're only beginning to understand that. There needs to be government and regulators in place who stay ahead of what the digital age is going to do. If we don't do that, the disruption is going to continue unabated, and we don't know what the outcome of that's going to be. Why? Because now it's driven by profit. It's not driven by the actual need to serve humanity. It's driven by how soon can I get it on the market to make my billions and retire before I'm 40. This is really a very unhealthy way to advance technology compared to how technology in the past was advanced. Okay, so that's factor number two. Now the rest of the presentation is really going to be about mostly how I re-articulated the spiral dynamics model in ways that to make it acceptable as a model that moves human evolution into the future. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay. So people who know my work, think that I'm bringing along, Graves's work, Don's work, and Don's work with Ken Wilber, and creating my own model. Really, I'm not doing that as much as I am taking best practices from Graves, best practices from spiral dynamics, and the best ways integral theory has enhanced the spiral dynamics, not the other way around. Integralists, people who came to spiral dynamics through the integral model, know shit about the model. Okay? They spend their lives applying the colors at a very arbitrary level, thinking that they understand spiral dynamics. Spiral dynamics is a deep theory that, in my opinion, still explains everything. Not entirely everything, but it needs further articulation from someone who really understands the fundamentals of Graves's work and Don's work to carry it further into the future. And I hope my work here at least carries it a little bit further to attempt to try to help us address climate change. So what I've done is I've taken best practices from those three geniuses, and I've revisited something in Graves's work that very few people are aware of, that he created in the last 10 years of his academic activity. He created a concept called the 6 upon 6 hypothesis. And basically what that says is that As you know, emergence is made. The model is made of tiers, and each tier contains 6 stages of development. Okay, this is the understanding that we have of the model. The first tier is made up of 6 stages, but then as we enter a new tier, the theme of the stages repeats, but at an exponentially higher level. So if you're at stage beige, stage 1, survival, is about the survival of the individual. Okay, at stage 7, which is yellow, okay, it's stage 1 in the spiral 2, which repeats the theme of survival, but at an exponentially higher level. Now we're talking about not the survival of the individual, but it's the survival of the planet, as the survival of all life on the planet. So this is the nature of the 6/6 hypothesis. I revisited Graves's research in that and used it as a part to augment the research that I've done to see if the science verifies or justifies what Graves has said. And it is amazing how intuitive he was in the mid-1970s, how intuitive he was, and how true most of the things that he said are coming through today. So that's what Gaian intelligence is all about. It's taking Graves's research, joining it with the idea that, you know, climate change is here. You know, we now feel it. It's no longer a hypothesis anymore. It is actually happening. And so some of that science began to emerge, and that's what Second Sapiens is based about. The only other thing that I want to relate to on this slide here is the subtitle of it. Okay, the transcending human exceptionalism. The idea of human exceptionalism came to me from an American author by the name of William Catton. William Catton was the founding father of eco-sociology here in the United States. And back in the 1980s, he wrote a book called Overshoot. And in it, he basically makes the case on the primary cause of our problems now with the environment. And he says that just for us to exist in the modern lifestyle that we have gotten used to, we consume at least 100 times more resources than our ancestors did just 200 years ago. And so, and he goes, well, this is an example of how the modern mind thinks of itself as it's on the top of the apex of evolution. Okay? And he says, and this is the biggest fallacy of modernity, is that because we think that we are on the top of, in a sense, that we separated ourselves from Mother Nature and made ourselves superior to it, is the basis of the problem of every ecological degradation that we see around the world. So what he offered is, in a paper he called transcending the human exceptionalism paradigm and moving into a new ecological paradigm. This is a case that he makes, is this is the only way we're going to be able to save the planet. So to relate back to this model, if you look at what Graves, Beck, and Wilbur created, they created their models and they could have very much been used to address climate change, except climate change wasn't visible in their time. So the models defaulted to being used to human-built systems. And this is the other huge distinction between my work and any work that came before, is that everything else, as complex as it is, before the onset of the Anthropocene epoch, before climate change became undeniable, was being applied to human-built systems. So this is a clear distinction that we need to make. Are we addressing human-built systems? Because if that's all we're doing and we're not worried about the natural systems, which is the larger whole on that contains all the human systems, we are doomed as a species. We are dooming the planet. Okay, so that's another distinction to keep in mind. Okay, now the next slide, please. Now, so for those of you who are not fully familiar with Graves's work, I want to bring something from his 6/6 hypothesis. And in the last decade of his active academic work, Graves hypothesized that his model, like the DNA double helix, is a double helix itself. Okay? It is made up of two strands. One he called the problems of existence, and the other he called the complex adaptive intelligence within us. Okay? And here's something key to understanding why or how to address existential issues. He says that problems of existence, problems that appear in the milieu, are the primary things that trigger our higher intelligence. Okay, so let me give an example of this. So, relating to the example that I just gave, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we were living fine. Everything was okay with the paradigm that was created post World War II. The intelligence that created those systems coincided with the needs of the people. Intelligence meaning life condition. Okay, life conditions have gotten more complex, yet intelligence stayed here. Okay, so it's going to be the rise of more complex, rise in problems that are going to act as a catalyst against our complex adaptive systems that are dormant in our minds. Okay, to activate the higher level of intelligence. So once this is here, the intelligence needs to recalibrate here. And unfortunately, we haven't done that. Okay. And due to the way we've been living our lifestyle, in the sense that, hey, modernity is the best we're going to have it, we kept ourselves somewhere between the last two rungs on the first tier there. So what Graves labeled as ER and FS, those are orange and green respectively. Okay. But what we've done in externalizing so much of our lifestyle to the environment, the problems of existence kept multiplying. And in Graves's model, the 6-upon-6 model, yellow and turquoise are representative of ecological decline. A1 is the label that he gave yellow. And its primary purpose, the primary purpose of yellow in the second iteration, is to save all life on the planet. The primary objective in turquoise is to have a humanity that is ecologically aligned with all other life form on the planet. So turquoise in this case stabilizes whatever yellow has to fix to get us to the stage where we need to be. Okay? So if you've noticed here, because of our preoccupation with staying in the modern construct that we created for ourselves, the problems along the problems of existence strand of the double helix have moved up to yellow, up to so A1 is the problems of existence station on the A1N1 coupling in the yellow system. The B1 is the problems of existence station on the B1O1 coupling in the turquoise system. Okay, those need the N1 and the O1 intelligence in order for them to emerge properly. And this represents the biggest gap that humanity will face. It is important to understand this construct because it is the rational science. It's proven, scientific research based on Graves' research that, always the problems that occur in the milieu are the ones that trigger our higher intelligence. And we have successfully blocked ourselves from reaching higher stages of development because we thought, modernity is the best thing that we're going to have. We triggered higher and higher order problems that we continue to be unaware of. Okay. Now, the next slide, please. So this is really, this is quite a complex slide, and I want to explain it in the simplest way I possibly can. So what you see in front of you is the Gravesian model mapped out, the entire 8 stages and what he calls the gap and the chasm, the huge valley we have to overcome when we go from first tier to second tier. What you see in front of you is the life cycle of all 8 systems that he envisioned. So the blue dots that you see in between those 2 yellow lines there, the lower dot on the bell curve is the entry stage into a new value system. You enter there, that value system, the content of that value system begin to define a person, a culture, a group. It reaches a nodal phase and then begins to decline. As it declines, what's in it becomes less and less effective to use as a solution. It reaches a point where it reaches the higher nexus point on its life cycle. And if it's in an open state, it hands over automatically the destiny or life conditions to the next life cycle in place. This is how emergence along a healthy spiral happens. But what happens is when a system is too closed, it moves past that nexus point. And anything past that nexus point is only a downward trajectory that can drag down the entire spiral with it. Past the nexus point, it gets to a decline phase, and then an entropy phase, and then finally death, okay? And if it reaches death, many parts of its DNA become toxic that they're not usable. So the whole idea of transcend and include ends there. And then, yellow has to do a lot more work in order to include it in the next system. So assume the emergence along the first tier is normal. You get to the stage where we pass green, and suddenly we're on a huge decline before we get into second tier. And the reason for that is yellow needs a gestation period. Yellow needs reflection to determine which of the values we have experienced so far become included as part of its expression, as a part of its DNA. So the semicircles that you see in between the colored semicircles that you see in between those bell curves, that's what gets carried forward into the yellow expression. Okay? So not everything from the first tier is worth preserving according to the yellow system. Only a little bit of it. Now, multiply this problem 10 times over in a sense that now it's being applied to a new intelligence, an entirely new intelligence based on natural intelligence. And there's even less of the intelligence that we have experienced so far that makes it onto the other side of the model that becomes a part of the new yellow DNA. Okay. Graves called this the gap and the chasm that we will experience, and that once we achieve it, it'll be a momentous leap into the yellow system. What I'm calling it in my book is the I have to look at my notes here to remember the darkness before the dawn phase, and I dedicate an entire chapter to address this in my work. It is really about how do we deal with collective trauma. This is not a trauma that affects just one individual or one community. It will affect the entire world, separate regions of the world at one time. And the further we move into it, if it continues not being addressed, it will be the whole world that needs to be collectively on the couch processing trauma. We'll talk about this more if you have any questions about it in the Q&A session. But so as we rise to begin to define what the yellow system is, we begin to solve our problems from an entirely new ecological perspective. Now, to go back to what I said earlier about the double helix, what you see in front of you is the axis where the horizontal line shows the existential problems, okay? So because of our closed system in viewing modernity is the highest we're ever gonna get, we kept externalizing our problems of existence to the point where now they're triggering the problems of existence in the turquoise B1 stage, okay? The vertical line represents the complex adaptive intelligence, okay? In order for us to address the problems in the B1 stage, we have to trigger the intelligence that's in the O1 side of the intelligence. Our leading edge of intelligence today is somewhere between orange and green. We're still fighting on whether tariffs are appropriate, or your governance is better than my governance, or different issues that preoccupy us with human-built systems, ignoring the fact that problems of higher order that are planetary in nature are advancing without us, without giving a damn about what we're doing. Okay, so this explains the issue a little bit better, brings a little bit of clarity and really shows you the challenges that we have that we need to overcome, and we need to do so quickly. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what happens when we switch that human exceptionalism paradigm to a paradigm that says, it's now Mother Nature's intelligence? The switch is, we always see a hierarchical form of higher form of intelligence. All Mother Nature wants to do is seek homeostasis. She just wants to seek balance as much as possible. So the entire foundation of the model changes. The way Graves envisioned the model, it was a three-legged model. He often described this model as a biopsychosocial model, something that you often hear Dr. Beck repeat. But it's the bio part is made of the neurology and the biology. In the old model, when it's all nested in human intelligence, that's what that crude brain circle figure shows. So the entire model is nested in human intelligence. The shift to second tier stays the same. It is from first tier neurobiology to second tier neurobiology, from first tier psychology to second tier psychology, from first tier sociology to second tier sociology. It was really no differentiation other than, it's more encompassing, but it applies to human built systems. Okay. When you nest the model in Gaian intelligence, in natural intelligence, the entire calculus changes. You're sort of limiting human intelligence to the first tier because we've already experienced it. Okay? We're really not abandoning human intelligence. That's not what the purpose of Second Sapiens is. Purpose of Second Sapiens is to learn from our mistakes and understand that Mother Nature's intelligence is far more superior than ours, and that we have to start understanding her again at a deeper level with the benefit that the Enlightenment gave us, with the benefit of us being able to do the microanalysis, the scientific research, and all that. And so so psychology becomes eco-psychology on the other side. Sociology becomes eco-sociology. Neurology becomes the study of the neurosphere. We'll talk about that in a minute. And biology becomes the study of the biosphere. Okay, so that's the transition. To stay consistent to how the models are referred to, that is the transition that we would need to go through. The next slide, please. Okay, so this slide here comes entirely from Don's work. Don and Chris Cowan, his associate who wrote the Spirale Dynamics book with him. And this comes from a concept that Don called the value system attractor model. What Don basically proposed is the idea that every value system has certain attractors that come to it in a self-organizing principle that define the totality of that value system. And those attractors are like general category names. They're things like philosophy, sociology, politics, economics, technology, things of that nature, archetypes. Religion is a very important factor of this. These are all the things that come together to define what a value system looks like. The more complex a society is, the more of these attractors it has. Okay, but when you nest the model in natural intelligence, the nature of those attractors becomes entirely different. So we talked about the three things that changed under the Gravesian model. These are the things that change the Gravesian model plus the value system attractor model. Ecology, psychology becomes eco-psychology. Philosophy becomes eco-philosophy. The neurosphere, in my book, I borrow from three evolutionary biologists who are close friends of the Spirale Dynamics community, Dr. Bruce Lipton and Dr. Elizabeth Satoris, and their work on the evolution of life from the smallest molecular structures to the things that define the largest form of biology, onto the genius of Howard Bloom, who by many measures is considered the Einstein of America. Howard Bloom introduced the concept of the global brain in a book. Howard used to do presentations to the Spiral Dynamics trainees at Don's invitation. They were really close friends. And basically what Howard says is that the global brain represents the intelligence of life that began 3.5 billion years ago. And that we as a species that has emerged less than 100 or 200,000 years ago as Homo sapiens are nothing but small neuron connections in that configuration of the global brain. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how complex the intelligence that brought life into being 3.5 billion years ago, and the different tests that it experienced the normal evolutionary process that gotten us to where we are, how feeble our own intelligence is when you compare it to that. So this is the neurosphere that we really need to look at, that we are part of a far greater intelligence, not just what's in our, the 1 kilogram of gray mesh between our ears. Okay, to move on with that, the remainder of that slide, what economics must become ecological economics. The pace of economic growth cannot exceed the pace with which Mother Nature can regenerate herself. Technology becomes wisdom technology. We'll talk about that in a minute. So yeah, let's just move on to the next slide where most of these are talked about. Yeah, I'm sorry. We changed the order of this. Can you move? Yeah. Okay, that one. Yes. So when I was looking to establish a scientific basis for my new iteration of Graves' work, I figured, well, the first people who are going to dismiss my work, of course, academics who are firmly planted in the scientific method, in a Newtonian way of viewing things. So I looked to see in Don's work, Wilbur's work, and Graves' work to see where in their work they talk specifically about science and the evolution of science. Okay, I didn't really see much in Don's work other than the idea that science is born in orange. Okay, Wilbur, almost the same thing, except Wilbur refers to other scientific applications, but still through the scientific method. Really nothing that says, the science moves with the stage of development, that it needs to reinvent itself completely, that includes the stage below it. And so I began to research Graves' work as well, and I found something in his unpublished work. There was a lecture that he gave at the University of North Texas back in 1978, where he was giving a brief description of his theory, and when it came to one point in the lecture, he says, something happened in 1900 that we've never seen before. And he continues talking, and then something happened that we've never seen before. And then at the end of the lecture, one of the students asks, what happened in 1900? And Graves answers by saying, our scientific paradigm before 1900 existed only through Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics explained everything, and there was nothing else that explained things before that. And then around 1900, you begin to see the rise of minds like Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr, theory of relativity and quantum theory, and that whole infrastructure, or that whole community of scientists around the Manhattan Project that were really studying the atomic and the subatomic nature of existence. And so he says that was in part the birth into our green system. And Graves labels the green system as the relativistic system. Okay, so the theory of relativity jives well with what he says about what the nature of it is. But as I did more research, I discovered that really most of their work, although they have a very small footprint in green, most of those science belong in second tier. But then Graves goes on and says, and immediately after the end of World War II, you're beginning to see something entirely different. Okay, and he says that's when you begin to see the birth of systems thinking. And when he says, and what's becoming ubiquitous now, so he's talking about the late 70s, is the ubiquitous use of systems thinking. And so to me, that was indication that this was an evolutionary trajectory. So I began to do research, and I researched complex adaptive systems, and surely enough, on the Wikipedia page of complex adaptive system is Graves' name. Okay, so I figured, I'm on to something here. I should just continue moving forward with it. And the more research I did, the more I, came up against that same wall that says, okay, you moved from Newtonian science to complex system science to complex adaptive systems. What is the next stage that's going to move us into natural science? Because those first three columns that you see, they're still very useful. 95% of our problems can be solved, 80% of them through the scientific method of Newton. Studying experiments, vetting them, getting peer reviewed and getting published and experimental. I mean, 80% of our solutions still come from there. But the problem with the first three columns there is they're all being applied to human-built systems. So I needed to find a science that is based on natural intelligence. And I found that in the writings of a systems thinker by the name of Fritz Capra. And he wrote a book called The Complex Systems of Life. And in that, he compares every form of a human-built system to its scientific basis, and then he brings forth the idea, similar to how Howard Bloom related the intelligence of humans being only a partial representation of the greater intelligence. He brings in the idea of feedback loops. And this is really important to understand because that's going to make the difference between whether we address climate change properly or not. Feedback loops are essential to everything, every single holonic structure that exists in nature, from the micro to the mega to the macro to the largest possible application. We have to account for feedback loops. The smaller the structure, the quicker maybe the feedback loop, the larger, the more delayed the feedback loop is. That's why, this problem with climate change started 50, 60 years ago, but we really haven't felt it because that feedback loop is still filling with that dark matter. But the size of the system is that huge that it hasn't reached a tipping point yet. Okay, so what's important here to understand is feedback loops. The simplest way to understand this is Newton's second law of thermodynamics. I think that's what it was. Basically the rule that says for every action there's an opposite and equal reaction. Okay, so in our modern way, in our frailty of living a modern lifestyle, we have completely forgotten the reaction. We have thrown the reaction, out with the environment, externalize it to the environment, regardless what the consequences were. We got in the habit of doing that. Mother Nature does not do that. She operates on a completely different form of intelligence than ours. And part of it is feedback loops at every level of ecosystem. The best example of that is if you don't water your flowers that are sitting on the shelf in your office, they die. Feedback loop. You don't give it water, it dies. That's a feedback. Okay, so basically this is how things work. Now so we've established that there is very few things that are happening with empowering the turquoise form of science, but there are people who are realizing those values that are speaking to us and are making us aware of things that are coming. And so the question here is, how do their voices sound like when we just hear them speak? And this will be a tool really for you to differentiate between whether someone is going to be successful in addressing climate change or not. Okay, so the one thing to keep in mind in this graphic here, and it's a repeat from an earlier graphic, is when we're applying spiral dynamics to the macro system, the largest holonic structure you see there is solving world problems. That pertains to man-made or human-made structures. That's level 6 in complexity that Don, through his experience, formulated in as far as that scale is concerned. dealing with Mother Nature it takes on an entirely different dimension. It is complexity level 6 taken to the power n, and n is determined by the degree to how quickly we begin to uncover the science needed to address climate change. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind. So these are some of the messages that are coming to us from scientists who are realized in that turquoise stage. The first one is from an author by the name of Elizabeth Kolberg. She authored the book, The Sixth Extinction. She has won several international awards for that book. It has more than 5,000 five-star ratings. And she was interviewed by an organization who does research on sustainability practices. And they basically asked her what her thoughts were about all the different sustainability and regenerative models that have been created. And her answer was very simple. She basically said, just keep in mind that the scale of solution has to match the scale of the problem. Meaning that you can't create something, as a part of your work at a lab somewhere, creating, just another piece of regenerative technology, green technology or something like that, waiting for it to be verified, waiting for it to be to see if there's a market for it. We cannot use the current orange infrastructure in place to scale up what we need to create. That what she's basically saying is the size of the problem is planetary. The solution has to become as quickly as possible a planetary solution. And she does not see anything that is in the works that's like that. Okay, so this is the nature of what we face. Solutions that address climate change have to be vetted a lot quicker, have to be put into place by a global consortium of governments and leaders who believe that climate change is here. There cannot be any dissent in that, or at least the majority of people have to believe that. And those solutions have to be implemented at the highest scale possible. Okay, the second quote comes from a climate change professor, Professor David Holland, professor at one of the universities in New York. And the New York Times this past summer was doing a series of articles about how close we are to climate change tipping points. And so he specializes in the polar ice melt. And so they asked him, how, from your perspective, from your area of specialty, how close are we to climate tipping points? And his answer was basically that, well, we thought we had it figured out 5 years ago. Our research indicated that the melting of the ice in the poles was moving at twice the rate that it was moving at historically. And he goes, and only 2 years later, we were proven wrong. Okay, the research that second year proved that the rate of polar ice melting was 4 times the historic rate. So that gives you an idea of how exponentially those systems are moving. That for him to have taken the research that he's covered 5 years earlier to put it through the vetting process of our traditional scientific models, for it to be reviewed, for it to be implemented by the institutions that we have, the data becomes obsolete within months. Okay, so that's the nature of complexity, is that we cannot think that the old scientific models can still serve us. Okay, the last quote on the right there comes from someone who I consider one of the most knowledgeable people about climate change and Earth systems. The guy's name is Johan Rockström. He is one of the founders of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact. And this comes from a TED talk that he gave just a few months ago. And the conclusion of his talk basically was the statement that you see up here. Linear change is no longer an option. So we can no longer accept the reductive Newtonian science anymore. The only option is exponential change. The only currency that matters is speed and scale. We must govern the entire planet, and we must do so quickly. Okay, so governing the entire planet is a huge issue. Doing so quickly is even a bigger issue. So you can really understand the magnitude of how the anthropogenic sciences are being ignored. Okay, we can move to the next slide, please. Again, these are additional voices coming to us from that new second tier. I'm calling that the anthropogenic Gaian sciences, simply because it is a new form of science that relies mostly on, again, the complex adaptive systems of life, not systems that were used before to address human-built systems. So the first two graphs you see up there, the one top left and top right, come from the Anthropocene Review, a magazine for serious researchers into climate change. This particular research was led by a person by the name Will Steffen. He worked with a large number of scientists to uncover this, and this really became an eye-opening to people who really know the issues we are facing. What they have uncovered is that there's a huge and direct correlation between how we've been living our modern lives to how quickly we are depleting the resources in the planet. If you look at those graphics closely, look at when these things began to take off. It is around 1950 that those scales became exponential. And this goes inside with the idea that, we put the idea of war behind and embrace the idea that commerce and adapting a society of consumption and the capitalist model of free markets and all that is what's going to save us. Well, it might have saved us in not creating wars against each other, but we essentially turned our guns collectively against Mother Nature. And this is what's happened. Okay, so those are messages coming to us from people in the know, from people who are firmly placed in those turquoise sciences, yet they have little power to influence decisions. Okay, the system below that, okay, is a graphic that comes to us from Johan Rockström. In it, he's the one who created the planetary systems model in 2009, and he uncovered at the time that there were as many as 7 planetary systems. So it's no longer just climate change that we need to be concerned about. There are things such as the loss of biodiversity. There are things such as the degree to which we are adding to the salination levels of the oceans, the degree to which we are dumping chemicals into our waterways, the degree to which we are making our fresh water disappear. All these things are factors that come into play. So we can no longer just consider climate change as a single factor. And so he's saying back in 2009, we have passed 3 of those 7 boundaries, meaning that they have reached a level of tipping point where the predictability past the tipping point of a life cycle of a system becomes exponentially unpredictable. Okay, so that's just the nature of that science. Okay, and then in 2015, he did that same research again and uncovered that we have crossed 4 boundaries in those planetary systems. And then again in 2023, which is the latest available, and again, this is all new science. So him and his team added yet another 2 boundaries to the planetary system. And he says we have crossed 6 out of the 9 boundaries, meaning that we are now completely at the mercy of Mother Nature. And people, generally would laugh and say, well, we've always been at the mercy of Mother Nature. Well, she has become a lot more merciless towards us because of our actions. Okay, so this is the uncertainty that we have to learn to live with. And the last graphic there, it really, okay, I'm watching my time here. I want to make sure we stay on target. So the last graphic you see there, the lower right. I'm sorry, did someone say something? Yeah, okay. Yeah, we're okay on time. The way is we're about an hour into the presentation. Okay, yeah, so the graphic on the lower right, when I was trying to get scientific writers with publishers to consider my book for publishing, and I explained to them my rationale of why, we are behind the ball in addressing climate change. The bright spots that they found was that, wow, imagine that we can do something to reduce the carbon footprint, like what happened during the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. As if we can repeat that without the huge toll it took on lives and the economic decline of in the trillions of dollars, if we can just repeat that without those damages, it will be great. And I heard that argument several times, so I did some research on it. And the graph that you see there comes from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is a community of 500 to 600 scientists, the brightest minds that are working on climate change. And they submit these reports every couple of years or so. And just to keep the system honest and unbiased, the rotation of the scientists change every 5 to 6 years. So there is no biases built into this. It's all scientists who really know what they're talking about. And so if you look closely at that graph, the lower darker gray graph shows, yeah, indeed, our carbon footprint dropped during COVID. So in about 18 months of global shutdown, okay, the total net effect of that was a reduction in that period of time of about 10% of where the climate, where the carbon footprint was. Okay, but then if you're coming to this from a long-term anthropogenic sciences perspective, you follow the trajectory of the blue line. That is over time. Okay, and you can tell from that, the trajectory of that line, that things have kept growing, but not only growing, they're growing exponentially. And the reason for that is we are beyond those tipping points where chaos happens, and we think we can address that chaos from a perspective of, oh yeah, no, let's see if we can duplicate what happened here. We won't be able to. In order for us to get an indication of whether that works or not, the entire global economy, the way it was shut down during the COVID, would have to be shut down like that for at least a decade for us to see if this will influence the direction of that blue line or not. An impossibility under current economic conditions and what drives this world, that will be an impossibility to adopt. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, so again, this pertains to the shift from human exceptionalism to Gaian homeostasis. In my work to try to really define this and put some research behind it, I ran into the word pantometry. I don't know if, yeah, this is the same in French. Pantometry comes from Middle English, and the term itself was revived very recently by an American professor by the name of Alfred Crosby in a book published in the late 1990s called The Measure of Everything, where the Harvard professor takes the idea that everything could be explained through our rational orange mind and to be applied to every phenomenon that exists in nature. So in reading the book, he asks the question, well, now we're able to measure the level of happiness or the level of sadness. The level of happiness when you're watching a feel-good movie. We measure the degree to which your brain excretes certain hormones, and that'll be a measure of happiness. If you're sad, your brain excretes another form of hormones, and that's a measure of sadness. So he extended most of the scientific research based in that orange system to apply to every phenomenon that exists, ignoring the subjective aspect of that, ignoring the idea, okay, if I'm happy, okay, you might be measuring the level of serotonin in my brain that's making me happy, but are you really understanding why that movie made me happy? Maybe it's associating me with a pleasant memory. Maybe it's associating me with a childhood memory that was a happy thing for me. Maybe it's so the subjective, which is like half of the model in the integral model, is completely excluded from how Orange sees things. Okay, so in the spirit of wanting to do the comparison, I looked at the other categories that he talked about in that book and combined them with that attractor model to get areas that we can really focus in on and see what they look like on the other side. Okay, so what you see in front of you are from that table that I created. Psychology on the other side becomes eco-psychology. Sociology becomes eco-sociology and eco-philosophy. The field of eco-sociology and eco-philosophy were created by William Catton, the professor I spoke about earlier, the authors of Overshoot. Okay? Biology becomes the biosphere. That's pretty much self-explanatory. It's not about our physical survival anymore. It's about the physical survival of the entire biosphere. We already talked about the neurosphere and the work of Howard Bloom. Egocentrism becomes ecocentrism, less ego, more eco. Human intelligence needs to be nested in natural intelligence. This is what this whole thing is about. Quantification and externalization. This is what the modern mind does. It quantifies things for the sole purpose of seeing its absolute benefit, and it externalizes everything associated with it to the environment. On the other side, what we need to do is we still need to quantify, but instead of exclusion, we have to integrate it. So in a sense, we'll quantify something and put it back in its natural setting in order for us to understand its feedback loops, in order for us to begin to understand how it interacts with other parts of the complex system. What does its absence mean? How does the system adjust without it? What does it mean to introduce it back to the system? How does the system adjust to that? And if there's beneficial interest for everybody that's created in those actions. That is the nature of feedback loops that allows ecosystems to thrive. It has done that for 3.5 billion years. Okay. Western philosophy, I dig into that quite a bit, but the thing to understand here is at the elemental level, what we need to do is overcome the negative aspects that it has given us. We have to move. Is there a question? Is there an issue?
Not yet. No. We're
okay.
listening.
Okay. So the idea that we need to bypass the ugly parts of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution and return to really an era where existence was in accordance to local tribes. Existence was before the Western values came to rise and gave us the era of empires and colonialism. Back at a time where we lived in tribal existence, where intelligence was really defined with our relationship to each other, our relationship to the land, and our relationship to the cosmos. Okay, to return back to that, having learned the lessons of being in the Enlightenment and a scientific perspective, gives us a fresh perspective on that. And that's really what if we take that to the planetary scale, this is what turquoise is all about. Okay, so democracy, if that's where we are. Technological singularity will become planetary conformity. The fight today is on when we are going to be able to reach a stage in technological development where artificial intelligence becomes smarter than human intelligence. That is no longer the fight. That is no longer the goal. What we need to look at is how do we deploy our intelligence along with whatever artificial intelligence can provide in assistance. Okay, because we're the wise ones. AI intelligence works in what we give it. It cannot be intelligent for the kind of intelligence we need to emerge into Second Sapiens. The intelligence that AI offers has very little that is based in Second Sapiens. We're looking at creating new sciences. We're looking at creating new ways of dealing with each other. Things that AI cannot possibly mine because it doesn't exist anymore, or yet. It doesn't exist yet. Okay, so we need to shift from the idea that this is a competition on how soon we achieve singularity to the idea that both our intelligence and artificial intelligence could be used to make sure that we stay within the boundaries of Earth's habitability. Okay, the patriarchal archetypes and monotheism, I usually mix those into one category, and that really has to do with the idea of the damage the patriarchy has caused to the planet. The whole notion that the Abrahamic religions made Adam, the first creature of our species, and in doing so, tip the balance away from Mother Nature. Gaia, Mother Nature, is a representative of the feminine. According to Jung's research, the mother archetype is the first archetype from which all other archetypes emerged. The mother archetype is the Gaian archetype that gave birth to the land, that gave birth to the air, to the sea, and everything ensued from there. If you follow the Greek myth, or for that matter, any other world myth. Okay, so that's the whole idea of transcending who we are, and returning to deep ecology, to our relationship with what really represents the higher power, the planet itself, and our understanding of the cosmos. Economic philosophy of degrowth philosophy. Okay, so the whole paradigm of our economic neoliberal economics now, an economy has to grow or otherwise die. That paradigm needs to come to an end. We simply do not have the resources to continue growing the way we are. The focus should be how to preserve what remains of the little resources that we have, and begin to address the limits of growth, the limits of what Mother Nature can give us, and live within those parameters. So you can sense the shift is from what we've taken for granted as the good, the just, and the beautiful, to an entirely different paradigm that says, okay, well, great, that gave you a sense of purpose and purpose of life, for a few hundred years, but because you live that lifestyle, now you're beginning to affect the larger holons, which makes it possible for you to live that way. And here's what you need to fix: is a much higher order system that you have to fix in order for you to make adjustments to the lifestyle that you've gotten used to. So it's that kind of a shift that we need to look at. Okay, so the idea of market feasibility, if you're an entrepreneur, you think of a business model that you want to make into something that's marketable. You do not look at the market feasibility of that. This applies to corporations. This applies to entire industries. We should not look at whether a model is feasible or not. That is how Orange has gotten us to where we are. You instead look at whether that model is going to impact our planetary systems and how. And if it has a low carbon footprint, then you move to the next level. You look at the global material footprint. How much more do we have to extract from nature in order to create that product? And then you look at the larger scale, which is the ecological footprint. The ecological footprint, the best way to understand it is look at the supply chain that is now part of so many management philosophies. Look at it as an ecological supply chain. Mother Nature, just because of the nature it exists, to its autobiotic nature, it's, the way it has feedback loops at every level, it accounts for everything from the micro to the mega. So you have to start looking at, does the extraction of the raw material of what I want to create cause environmental damage to where it's being extracted? Okay, does transporting it to the factory where it's need to be manufactured, does that add to those three things: the material impact, the ecological? Does shipping it to the end user create the same thing? Does, when the end user is done with it, what is the end of life like? Okay, so it is a loop. It is an ecological loop that has to be examined, not just the supply chain, but the ecological supply chain. And this is a big part of what I talk about in the latter chapters of the book. The next one we'll look at. I always like to end every slide with a positive quote from Graves. The last one comes really from that piece that allowed Dr. Beck to discover him in 1974. The title of the piece, if it wasn't a part of, those of you who've been trained at Spirale Dynamics, if it wasn't a part of the handout, ask whoever trained you to translate it to French and pass it out. The name of the piece is Human Nature Prepares for Momentous Leap. It has many gold nuggets in it that you really have to study closely to really understand what Graves is talking about. But in it, as Graves describes the transition from first tier to second tier, he says we're transitioning from a world of abundance that's defined by scarcity to a world that's the opposite. So what he's saying in that first part of that is we actually now live in a world of abundance, or we were when he defined this in the 70s. But what makes it scarcity are market forces. In order for a product to have a desirable market, in order for us to create supply and demand for a product, we have to put in the consumer's mind the idea that this product is scarce, that you have to act and buy it soon before all the supply is depleted. Okay, so the idea of scarcity in a world of abundance is just the creation of the markets. Okay, so we need to transition to a place where true scarcity exists, where our resources are diminishing. But so how do we make use of those? And that we do through regeneration. That we do through focusing on other things that the orange model is focused on. Regeneration is really through human connection, through how we relate to each other. Do we really need to get a new iPhone every year? Do we need to do this? Do I need to upgrade my home to the newest technology every 3 or 4 years? Questions like that. How do we relate to each other as human beings? A much simpler way to relate to each other, to recreate regeneration. How do we create local ecosystems? How do we empower cities to become their own ecosystem, almost independent from others? How do we, things of that nature? That's the transition that we need to look at. So that's really what's waiting for us on the other side, is that we need to become a lot closer, a lot more connected than we are now in order to really begin to collectively address the issue of climate change and what lies ahead. Okay. Now the next slide, please. Okay. Yes.
Say just one logistical information, because I think we're going to have to close in a few minutes.
Yes.
So we need to go to the transition for the online audience, but the audience here is still here.
Okay. I only have about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
Okay. So this slide here pertains to the Gaia Economic Protocols. This is what we need to substitute for the GDP model, for the gross domestic product model. That is the most powerful model that measures human productive output today. We need to replace that because it's based on entirely grow or die metrics of the orange system. It needs to be replaced by the Gaia Economic Protocols that say you must allow the planet to live in order for you to live. Okay. You can go through that and read it because we were short on time, but I highlighted in yellow the most important ones, especially for those of you who know spiral dynamics. Yellow, highlighting it in yellow means that it's a second-tier concept that is important. So those are questions that an industry leader, a corporate leader, a political leader need to ask themselves if they're concerned about the planet. You ask these questions of yourself. Like, for example, question number 2 on there, does the model put GDP growth ahead of the limits of the planetary Earth boundaries? Okay, that's a very important question to ask. If you're going to exceed those boundaries, you simply do not pursue that business. Okay, number 5 on there, highlighted in yellow, is this just another expression of the bright minds in the orange system that are looking for a technological solution, like Bill Gates? Much of what Bill Gates is doing now, especially, is in the yellow stage, but he still relies on his genius mind in the orange system to offer solutions. Are those really solutions that are being offered as a technological solution, not an earth matter, the large scale solution that Colbert talked about? Those are the things that you should be aware of. The last one on there is wise government. In the book, I called for what I call a Sapien 2.1 brain syndicate. This is a yellow brain syndicate where you pick the brightest minds who have yellow thinking in their specific area of specialty. And one of those specialties has to be what I call a wise government. We need a government, like I said earlier, we need a government not only that understands how the digital world works, but what the threats that we're facing from climate change is, and for them to have the power to change things. And the last thing on there is really what sums up this whole entire epic that we're moving into, is that you really have to understand that things are not going to be the same the way we've taken them for granted the last couple of 100 years. That we're entering an era or an epoch that is full of uncertainty, that chaos is going to be part and parcel of how we look at life from here on in, and that we have to get used to that uncertainty as a new normal. We can only approach that with humility, with the idea that we're only a very small creature or organism in the total landscape of existence. Okay. Now the last slide, and I just want to comment on that quickly on what Graves says. So if you look at, you can read the top line, but I want to focus on what Graves said. In that same piece from 1974, Graves said that there are three possible scenarios for how of the future of humanity. The first one, he said, that's detrimental, is the idea that we will be affixed to what he called a social complex of the blue, orange, green systems, where we use a double talk of humanitarian sounding speak that makes us think that everything's okay, shielding us from knowing higher order challenges. Okay, he says that's one of the issues that will that will account to cultural decline. Okay, the second issue is what he describes here, is that through the most gruesome scenario is that through successive catastrophes will descend all the way down the page. At the time that he coined this, the biggest threat was nuclear weapons, but that's not the issue now. The biggest threat now is climate change. And he uses the idea of the Ik tribe, that we will descend all the way down to the Ik tribe. Just a minute about who the Ik tribe and where he's getting that from. Graves is basing the argument there on a book written by an English anthropologist by the name of Colin Bolton, where he studied the Ik tribe in Uganda. This was a tribe that lived in perfect harmony in the lush jungle of Uganda for thousands of years. They didn't need to reach out for anything. They looked up at the trees, they found berries, they ate berries, they killed animals, they domesticated animals and used their milk and meat to survive. There was absolutely no need for them to emerge into higher states of existence. It was a very happy, sound existence in the purple stage of existence. And then Uganda becomes a modern country where they were advised by the United Nations that they should set aside the jungle as a national preserve. So what do? They move the tribe to an arid mountainous region, okay, where they had absolutely no idea how to raise crops. They had absolutely no idea how to take care of herds, how to hunt, and everything else. And within decades, the tribe descended down to savagery, down to the first level of existence, where the anthropologist tells a story that he witnessed himself, where a lion comes into the tribe and the lion eats a baby, and then the men in the tribe chase the lion, they kill the lion, they eat the lion and the baby. So look, I'm not trying to paint a grotesque image here of what's to come, but if we don't address the issues of climate change, the idea of our descent into that level of savagery has a lot more probability now than it did just a few decades ago when Graves articulated this. Okay, and I always want to end with a positive note from Graves, and it's this: the third condition that he says is that if we as a collective culture rise to the seventh level of existence, will rise to yellow, okay, and begin to create institutions and global governance structures from yellow, that we have nothing to worry about, that emergence will continue and human consciousness will continue to evolve, and we will just move on as a species till the next iteration. And with that, I rest.
Thank you, Said.
Indeed.
Thanks a lot for sharing a lot of information. And I think before people can process some questions in their mind, they also need to process all this wealth of information, but maybe also to process the emotions which arise from, well, looking at this perspective. There's one thing I'd like to maybe to share, for many years when I was talking about change, I used that sentence from a consultant who said, what got you here won't get you there. And when talking about the momentous leap, I had this image of, somebody maybe getting to the airport with a bike, but to go from Paris to New York, you have to take the airplane. So if I try to summarize what you said, maybe I have two words, and those two words are scale up.
Yes.
And then we could add a third word, which is adapt.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
But there's one question I would like to ask you to begin with, and then we'll let the audience maybe process their own questions. It's more the internal, the human dimension. You mentioned in passing the dark before the dawn, but in your book, it's a whole chapter, and it's a very important one. How do we process emotionally this moment when we realize that we're getting very, very close to extinction? And I think you have lots of things to say about that moment.
Robert, I think I've mentioned this to you before. That's really not my main area of expertise. I come to spiral dynamics from the large scale perspective, not really from the personal growth or the holding hands of executives or management people. And so what I put in that book is really based on my own personal experiences. As I've shared with you, I've just lost my beautiful soulmate, my wife. We were married for 25 years. She was really the one who brought me into spiral dynamics. She's the one who brought Wilbur's work and Don's work to the Middle East. So you can imagine the kind of a loss I feel in losing her. She struggled for years with a form of dementia called frontotemporal dementia, the absolute worst form of dementia. So you can only imagine the kind of heartbreak I went through witnessing her over a 7-year period decline the way she did. And really, people grieve differently. There isn't a magic bullet to tell people how to grieve. So what I put in the book are several models that were a part of my experience. Okay, and of course, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of grief is quite important. I think the most important part for us to overcome at this stage is denial. We have to come to accept the fact that climate change is here and it's not going to change. And the fact that if our leaders tell us, well, look, you're still happy doing your work, doing this, doing that, that's just because that's purely because of the nature of the complexity of the system. It has become random, and that, because we're spared 1 year, that doesn't mean that Mother Nature is not going to come back 5 years from now and make up for the years of its absence in destruction. So the whole idea is to get to the space where there's acceptance of this new notion and find people who think along the same lines as you do. Find a community of support that really favors your position. Our advocacy has to change. The idea that when I first spoke about this was about 5 years ago, and it was at the international conference to design a new global economic and financial system. And basically, the idea behind that whole thing of how climate change is going to disrupt whatever we're creating now is that, people go around thinking that nothing is wrong. And so I implored the people in the presence that, to really, you need to awaken the people who are in charge, who keep ignoring this. And so I told the audience, if you have kids in school, take them out of school, take them to demonstrate in front of your local representative, take them to the nation's capital for them to demonstrate in front of Congress, in front of their senators, in front of the executive branch that runs this country, that tell them basically, you are sentencing us to death because you are not addressing this issue. Now, this issue is now really being reflected in the way the courts are reacting. Okay? Generally, the courts in a great part in the United States here remain really quite liberal in their views, and they have allowed lawsuits brought by concerned individuals who really know what climate change is doing to allow themselves to be representatives of Mother Nature. And so there's a plethora of lawsuits now that says, we're going to stop you in your tracks because you're not addressing this issue. This is the kind of shift that we need. So once you move past the stage of denial that this thing is going to happen, instead of directing it towards anger and depression, direct it towards activism, direct it towards getting the attention of the people who are living for, in a greedy way, their own current lifestyle, and say, hey, you're affecting my future. I mean, I feel bad for my kids. I have two young daughters, young adults, and I worry about their future. Are they going to be able to not be as concerned about climate change as I was when I was their age? Those kinds of things. The only other example I can give is really an example from like real life experiences when these things happen. So, about a month and a half ago, we had the fires up in Los Angeles, which is about 100 miles away from us here. And, with every tragedy of that scale, you get to see how beautiful humanity rises to the occasion. So out of that catastrophe where 2,000 homes burned down, 6,000 people became homeless, the entire state and the entire country came together to support these people in their hour of need. They offered housing, they offered everything they can. Even here in San Diego, 100 miles away, we had trucks being filled for a 2-week period. Trucks being filled with blankets, with food, with water, with everything that those people told us that they need, going up nonstop to Los Angeles to help people. So people will rise to the occasion. So really, those are the things that I can articulate. Beyond that, I really don't know what it will take for us to sit on a therapist's couch and analyze what's going on. The degree of support needs to be multiplied 100 times over, and we don't have it. And that awareness comes by people speaking the truth about what the future looks like.
We, on one hand, take the time to absorb the shock, and at the same time also stay aware that yes, there are things to do. And I hope maybe the audience here has had a little bit of time to recover, and maybe some questions in the audience.
Hi, I'm Anna. I would like to know, what do you think, maybe it's not a big enough scale for you, but all the people who are working now in the economy based on the orange level, how are they supposed to transition to something else to make a living if we are based on consumption and we're supposed to go to less? How do you see the future, the professional future? What jobs need to be created in order for people to survive?
Yeah, well, that's why the scale of this is a profoundly structural shift. It's not what Dr. Beck would call a translational shift. It's a foundational shift. Remember the graphic we talked about where the values of the first year take a steep decline before they start rising again? Basically, all the orange jobs that we see today will have to disappear. We have to return. We have to return to being farmers, but we do so from turquoise. We do so from our need to survive and thrive at an entirely new level of ecological coexistence. It's difficult to imagine that happening now, because even the brightest people who understand climate change always want to create a model that, but we're shifting the way we calculate productive output to put more emphasis on human contribution instead of machine contribution or financial contribution. None of these models work. Think of Mother Nature as someone that works with completely different metrics, and we barely have an understanding of that. And it is that we have to understand and design from there to accommodate those needs. I don't foresee too many changes in the orange system taking place. Even green technologies are proving detrimental to the environment. Okay? So I do see Graves or actually Dr. Beck, was asked the question a few years before he passed, was asked the question, in your experience of this model, what have you learned? And he said, if anything that I learned, it's, evolution to the next stage does not happen voluntarily. We are not equipped, at least in the first year, we are not equipped to consciously evolve. Our systems are designed, and because of the size of them, it takes a long time to evolve them, and because of that, they tend to become to move into arrested states. That change happens only after collapse. Okay, so there'll be certain sectors of the orange economy that will collapse, and as much as I hate the digital age is helping to make that happen. AI and whatever future iterations of it is expected to render the entire job market as we know it obsolete within 100 years. There will be no jobs that we know today that will be related to the orange system that exists 100 years from now. The jobs that will remain will be high human touch, high human interaction. So it'll be basically returning back to a tribal life with all the knowledge that we have acquired from going up to the spiral. It will be to substitute for the wise man in the tribe. There will be the psychologist who understands psychology at the deepest level. And it'll be that kind of thing. The medicine man becomes the one who knows integral medicine, not the one who just goes into the forest and gathers herbs to fix. So it's that kind of a thing. You have to reimagine how culture is reorganized, and it is global turquoise tribes organized around smaller and smaller communities that have a lot of awareness of the idea that we cannot return to the stages of orange where we were that caused the problem in the first place. This is really becoming an issue, an existential issue. It is not a shift as if we're going up from blue to orange to green. It is a shift from going from a first tier that has caused the damage, so much damage to the environment that that system is appearing at least 200 years before Don or Graves ever expected it to manifest. This is our reality now, is that it is us, it is people who really understand the development models that need to bring in those values, because they're no longer like a place in the future. And the way Don, Graves, and Wilbur envisioned it is that it'll be a utopian place. Everybody thinks of turquoise as a utopian place. Before we get to that utopian existence in turquoise, we have to fix all the damage that we have caused the planet. And big part of that is a deconstructionist approach to everything that we have known. So, back to your original question, how do people make a living? There needs to be tremendous government intervention in this. This cannot be done through the private sector. Governments have to rise to the level of where the elements that were present there in the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe and Japan, that kind of engagement is needed at every scale of government as climate disaster becomes more and more of a pervasive problem.
Thank you, Said. Okay, maybe just as a conclusion, because it's getting quite late, but I'd like to share one thing. We have many people in the room who are aware of their responsibilities in, how could I say, walking along, together with the people who are going through this shock. And this is something that we're all thinking about. Even this question shows this preoccupation to sort of help people through the darkness before the dawn, right? And in the book, you develop one thing which is, I believe, quite important. You explain that yellow, the role of yellow, is not like to bring us to the other side. It is rather to help us while we are in the transition. Yes. There is a big mental shift. Many people in France, maybe in other places, we see what people write on Facebook. Many people still believe that we work our way through, to move up to yellow, but it does not work that way. We sort of accept things into yellow, right? And that's really what I see in the book. But we have still something to do, which is to help people process their shadows, process their fears, process all the darkness that is maybe embedded in our history. Would like to Would you like to share a word on this?
Yeah, Robert, I would relate that to Don's observation in his answer of what he experienced in using the model for 5 decades, and that is, in order for us to take something seriously, we have to see the potential damage that not doing something causes. So it's, if you try to now take what I said and take it to, if you're a corporate consultant, taking to the CEO and say, hey, look, this is what this guy's saying about the future. You'd better, you'd better shut your business down and start thinking like that. It's not going to go too far. It is going to be something that will wipe out that industry that CEO works in, that's going to trigger him into joining the call to do something different. So if we're comfortable, we're not going to do anything. Just because the consciousness comes into our awareness, that doesn't mean that we hold the power to change things. All we can do is advocate for that change, and to advocate in the best possible way we can. Short of that, we're going to really fall into a position of complacency, the place of depression, where you just feel like you're helpless. You feel like you can't do anything about it, when in reality you can. You just have to change the focus. It's no longer recycling your cans in the right bin. It is, we know that only 10% of those things go to recycling. The state of California now is suing all these plastic and aluminum manufacturers for lying to us about the recyclability of the product. So the idea that we can say, oh yeah, no, I'm doing my share in recycling is enough. It is not. You need to shift from, okay, I'm recycling my cans, to, okay, I'm going to join the movement in protesting, to show this issue is a generational thing. This issue is going to affect, my ability, my kids. I'm speaking on the behalf of the young people who are demonstrating that it's going to affect our ability to live a normal life and our ability to have families in the future. So that's the kind of advocacy that needs to be brought in. Substitute that for the idea that we're helpless as much as possible, and then the mechanics of how that happens, of course, changes from one community, from one individual to the other. But that's really where the attention needs to. After we've absorbed the weight of this, we need to rechannel the energy towards advocacy, and the proper form of advocacy, not what we've been told by industry. That, oh, no, we're making your cans recyclable. You have nothing to worry about. That's the biggest fallacy. This is how, what Graves said, this is how they keep us within that societal complex that makes us believe we're doing the right thing when in reality we're not.
Said, it's been already around us for a while, the expression act local, think global. Is there something that you would change to that expression? Something that we could update it?
Let me think about this for a minute. Act local, think global. In my book, I introduced the idea of, whatever model you introduce, look at who holds power to make it a reality. It's called the CAPI concept, the coalescence of authority, power, and influence. And I actually start one of the chapters with a quote from one of the anthropologists who says, "Don't underestimate the power of a small group changing the world." Unfortunately, I hate to be a pessimist, but when that anthropologist used that quote, we were still in like the Renaissance era of post-war possibility, exploring what we can explore in this new world driven by peace. Today, change from below is impossible. Why? Because Orange has figured out how to control the entire system above. Orange in our country dictates who we elect as a president. And that president is reversing 2 decades worth of hard work that environmentalists did. Trump has withdrawn us from the Paris Accords, of 2015. He's re-empowered the entire. I mean, it's so the idea that small people can influence things, that may be true, but you have to create that ecosystem all over the world, just for the hope that it might trigger the attention of everyone else. If we create all these, local micro communities, when they think globally, are they also thinking of who holds power, who's going to prevent them from making, who's going to prevent those dreams from coming through? Okay, and that's what you need to think about. That we need to think about who holds power in the higher holonic structures that we described earlier in the presentation. If it's, I'll tell you, if this direction in which we're moving towards autocracies and dictatorship continues, we're doomed as a planet, because the likes of Trump want to drill, they want to use petroleum, they want to exploit every possible natural resource we have. It finds harmony with what Putin wants to do. It finds harmony with what the Chinese are doing. It finds harmony with everybody on the lower system who has failed to move up the spiral instead of down the way they're doing. So the idea that we can think globally and act locally is a very noble idea, but we also have to look at who holds power at that global, that influences global action. And that local community, even if it's spread globally, okay? So if you have little smaller tribes that are doing exactly things like regenerative action and regenerative agriculture, and have given up their orange jobs, and they're focusing on community first, the way community existed, in the agrarian age with the benefit of the new technology, you also have to be concerned about whether these formations, if they populate the entire world, can they still affect the decision makers? We have beautiful green communities here in California, but California is just one state of 50 states. If Trump decides that, hey, drill baby drill, this is how we're going to go forward, what chance does the guy who's raising a regenerative garden or farm have when people who make the higher decisions are saying polluting the air is okay? So this is why we call on a global structure at every level. It has to be holonic, but it really has to also look to see who holds power at every stage of development, at every aspect of development: political, scientific, sociological, psychological, and so on.
Okay. Vous voulez ajouter quelque chose? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, one more. I know your perspective is from the economic point of view. What about spirituality?
Okay. If you can find a new Jesus who can preach the gospel of saving the planet, then that'll be a new form of spirituality. I mean, again, spirituality defaults to the community that practices it. Spirituality is more of a personal enlightenment kind of thing. If I reach turquoise and higher stages, like Wilber's model says, higher states of consciousness, in his model, it's third tier. If you reach that third tier yourself individually, are you really, how much are you helping the world emerge to higher consciousness? You're only influencing the environment that you're in. If, however, someone like Donald Trump wakes up one day completely transformed and finds a guru who teaches them what spirituality is in the third tier, and suddenly becomes a completely transformed world leader who can implement the policies that we need from a turquoise spiritual perspective, that's all we need. Still, the same metrics apply. This is not just economics. This is developmental holonics that work at every scale and at every level and at every aspect. Okay, so that's my answer to that. I hope it's not disappointing, but what you described is how the green system finds an out of its responsibilities. Okay, so oh no, I can't be concerned. I'm focused on my own growth. I've reached nirvana, therefore everything's okay. Graves warns specifically about this stage of development. He says green reaches the top of the ladder in the first tier, and he thinks this is the end of development. So the person in green sits in the lotus position, staring at his navel to the extent that he's using daddy's credit card and everything that got him there, staring at his navel, contemplating the secrets of the universe before the ceiling falls in on him. Okay, the metaphor of the ceiling falling in on him is the problem side of the A1 N1 aspect of yellow. So the idea that, you know, our problems end if I am enlightened and I sit there in meditative states hoping the world will change, you know, the physical world still matters. You know, if part of the ceiling falls on my head, I will feel it. You know, I haven't transcended physical existence yet to the stage that I won't feel pain from a ceiling falling on my head. You know, I'm not, again, I'm not trying to oversimplify here. I just want to inject our perspectives of consciousness with reality. Okay, so imagine that you're, you know, imagine someone like you know, the most recent president of the Philippines, who's in jail now. Imagine him, okay, the guy who went around wanting to control the drug trade, so he started killing the drug dealers and the drug users when these poor addicts needed therapy and needed rehab. He went around killing all of them, and now he's in jail for it. Imagine someone with his values, okay, collecting, gathering all those turquoise sciences we talked about, all the enlightened people that we talked about, and jails them, okay, because he's in a position of power to do so. Okay, so where does that leave the rest of us? Okay, those leaders. So you need to empower the leaders equally as much as you empower the lower ones. Okay, and so that's the nature of you know, when you ask the question, does this model hold? Does this model have the coalescence of authority, power, and influence? Does, you know, do the people in leadership position have the ability to emerge to stages where they know that if we realize climate change is this severe, do they together have the collective intelligence that leads them to believe our current models need to start winding down? And so where do we start? Till that debate begins to happen, you know, nothing's going to change. You know, so it's no longer Don in the last decade of his career. You know, before that, people thought the yellow system was a distributed intelligence model. And then as he got to experience the model more, he says it is no longer a trickle down. It's a trickle down and bubble up. So it's not, you know, top down intelligence. It's bottom up intelligence. So it is functional in the sense that you know, our current leaders are at the top now, and they dictate to us what happens now. We need to rise up to change that. So it's a combination of both. And you know, for functionality purposes, you have to study what the system needs, and then to apply that balance of trickle up and trickle down and bubble up.
Thank you, Said. And it's getting very late, so I'll just maybe summarize that with just one word, which is that whether we are thinking in green, yellow, whatever kind of terms, we need to seriously think the question of power. And I will give everybody an appointment between June 5 and 8. Said will be in Paris, and we will organize possibilities for people to meet you once when you are there. Thank you so much for your time. It was invaluable, and there's lots and lots of information to process. So thank you very much for this.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you all for coming, and I look forward to seeing as many of you as I can in June. Bye. Bye-bye.